Listen closely, my friends. There was a night when the most powerful man in the world could not sleep. Beyond the walls of his tent, nearly 200,000 Roman soldiers waited for dawn. Somewhere in the darkness, an enemy army prepared to attack. A plague had already stolen thousands of lives. Trusted friends had become strangers, and children he had buried still haunted his memories. The fate of an empire rested on one exhausted mind that carried more weight than any man should ever have been asked to bear. Yet Marcus Aurelius did not pray for an easier life. He did not ask fate to remove the burden from his shoulders. Instead, he reached for a small journal and began writing words that no audience was ever meant to read. Words written in silence, not to inspire the world, but to rescue his own mind from becoming its greatest enemy. Because Marcus had discovered something terrifying. Long before a man loses in the outside world, he loses a private battle that nobody else ever sees. The defeat does not begin when the opportunity disappears, when the money runs out, or when the relationship ends. It begins in the single moment a man secretly accepts that victory probably belongs to someone else. That silent acceptance changes everything. It changes the way he speaks before anyone notices, the way he walks into a room, the risks he refuses to take, and the opportunities he unconsciously avoids. His future begins collapsing long before reality gives him any reason to fail, because the mind always starts building tomorrow long before tomorrow arrives. Most people spend their entire lives believing they are fighting against difficult circumstances. They are not. They are fighting a mind that has already rehearsed defeat so many times that failure starts feeling familiar, and familiarity is one of the most dangerous addictions a human being can develop. The greatest prisons are almost never built from stone. They are built from repeated thoughts a man stopped questioning years ago. This is why two people can stand before the same opportunity and leave with completely different lives. One sees uncertainty and quietly retreats. The other sees the very same uncertainty and walks forward anyway. The difference is almost never intelligence, almost never talent, and almost never luck. It is training. The ancient Stoics understood this thousands of years before modern psychology ever gave it a name. They trained the mind before they asked it to face the world, because they knew that every external victory is first won in complete silence, inside a place no one else can see. That is exactly what this lesson is about. Not motivation, not empty positivity, not wishing, training. Over the next 7 principles, you are going to dismantle the invisible habits that convince ordinary people they were born for average lives and replace them with the same mental disciplines that allowed men like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus to remain unshaken while the world around them collapsed. But before we begin, understand this. The very first principle is also the one almost everyone ignores. It looks so small, so ordinary, that most people pass over it without realizing every victory, every fortune, and every remarkable life was quietly built on top of it. Principle 1. The discipline of perception. Epictetus once stood before his students and offered them an idea so simple that most men dismissed it within minutes, yet so powerful that the few who truly understood it were never the same again. He told them that no event has the power to disturb a man on its own. What disturbs him is the judgment he attaches to that event. The insult is not the wound. The rejection is not the wound. The failure is not the wound. The wound is the meaning you quietly decide those moments must carry. Imagine 2 men standing outside the same closed door after hearing the same word. No. The first man hears a verdict. He walks away convinced that life has finally confirmed what fear had been whispering to him for years, that he is not talented enough, not worthy enough, and not meant for anything greater. Months later, every decision he makes is quietly shaped by that single moment, until the future begins to resemble the very story he believed in. The second man hears the same word, but he refuses to call it a verdict. To him, it is nothing more than information. A closed door does not mean the journey is over. It simply means this path was never the one that was meant to carry him forward. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" he asks a far more dangerous question: "What is this trying to teach me?" That single question changes everything, because questions shape perception, and perception shapes destiny. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this truth almost every night. He wrote that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not caused by the thing itself, but by your judgment about it, and that judgment can be withdrawn at any moment. Think about the freedom hidden inside those words. It means no person can truly imprison your mind without your permission. No criticism can define you unless you agree to carry it. No failure becomes permanent until you decide it deserves that title. History has quietly repeated this lesson again and again. Every remarkable life contains moments that looked like defeat while they were happening. Inventors were laughed at before they changed the world. Writers were rejected before their books became timeless. Leaders were ignored before entire nations followed them. The event itself was never the deciding factor. The deciding factor was the meaning they refused to attach to it. This is why perception is the first discipline. A man who cannot control the meaning of what happens to him will spend his entire life becoming a prisoner of circumstances. Every setback will feel like proof that he should stop. Every criticism will sound like truth. Every obstacle will become evidence that success belongs to someone else. But the man who masters perception walks through the very same storms and somehow emerges stronger, because he has learned the one discipline the world can never take from him: the power to choose what every experience will mean. So beginning today, watch your own mind carefully. The next time disappointment arrives, resist the temptation to give it a verdict before you have examined it. Ask yourself whether this event is truly destroying your future or whether your interpretation is doing the damage. Because the life you eventually build will never be determined by what happened to you. It will always be determined by the meaning you chose to give it. And once you master that discipline, something extraordinary begins to happen. The world outside you may remain exactly the same, but the person walking through it is no longer the same man. That is where real victory begins. And the second principle will take that victory even deeper. Principle 2. Certainty before the proof. There is a dangerous habit almost every ordinary person carries without ever noticing it. They believe certainty is something that arrives after success. They wait for the promotion before they believe they are capable. They wait for the money before they begin thinking like a wealthy man. They wait for the applause before they trust the sound of their own voice. In other words, they hand their confidence over to the future and expect the future to return it to them as a reward. But the future has never worked that way. The future responds to conviction long before it ever rewards it. Cato the Younger understood this better than almost anyone in Rome. While powerful senators changed their principles to match public opinion, Cato never allowed the crowd to decide who he would become. He chose the man he intended to be before the world offered him a single reason to remain that man. They laughed at him. They mocked his simplicity. They called him stubborn, unrealistic, even foolish. Yet history quietly forgot the voices that mocked him and remembered only the man who refused to borrow certainty from other people's approval. That is the strange law of history. The crowd usually recognizes conviction only after it has already changed the world. Think carefully about how most people destroy their own future. They stand at the edge of an opportunity, asking for evidence that everything will work before taking the first step. They want guarantees before commitment, certainty before discipline, results before sacrifice. But life has hidden its greatest rewards behind a door that only opens after commitment has already been made. The evidence they are waiting for exists on the other side of the action they keep postponing. Every day they delay, they unknowingly strengthen the very fear they were hoping would disappear first. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that sounds almost impossible until you live it. A man's life is what his thoughts make of it. Notice what he did not say. He did not write that life becomes what circumstances make of it. He did not say fortune decides its value. He pointed directly toward the hidden architect living inside every human mind. Long before reality becomes visible, thought has already begun drawing its blueprint. Every repeated belief quietly instructs your actions. Every action becomes a habit. Every habit becomes character, and character eventually becomes destiny. By the time people call someone lucky, the invisible construction has often been taking place for years. Imagine an architect standing before an empty field. No walls exist, no roof exists, no doors or windows have been built. Yet in his mind the entire structure already stands complete. He does not wait for the building to appear before believing in it. The building appears because he believed in it clearly enough to begin laying the first stone. That is exactly how extraordinary lives are built. Every empire, every invention, every masterpiece, and every legacy first existed inside the disciplined imagination of someone who refused to mistake an empty field for an impossible future. This is why certainty is not arrogance. Arrogance refuses to learn. Certainty never refuses learning. It simply refuses surrender. It remains humble enough to improve every day while remaining unshaken about where it is going. The uncertain man changes direction every time the wind changes. The certain man adjusts his sails but never abandons his destination. That single difference, repeated over months and years, quietly separates the lives history remembers from the countless lives that disappeared because they spent too long asking the world for permission to begin. So, ask yourself something with complete honesty. How many dreams have you postponed because you demanded proof before commitment? How many opportunities have you buried because you expected confidence to arrive before action? Perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that people fail. It is that they never discover who they might have become because they spent their entire lives negotiating with fear instead of making a decision. The mind trained to expect the win does something radically different. It decides first, and then spends every ordinary day building the evidence that the decision was right all along. Hold on to that truth, because the next principle will challenge something even deeper. It will force you to look directly at every obstacle you have ever feared and reveal why the greatest barriers in your life may have been preparing you for the very future you thought they were preventing. Principle 3. The obstacle is the hidden path. There is a sentence Marcus Aurelius wrote that most people read too quickly and spend the rest of their lives failing to understand. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. At first, those words sound beautiful but unrealistic. How can loss become progress? How can rejection become opportunity? How can suffering become strength? Yet history keeps whispering the same answer. The obstacle never arrives to ask whether you deserve greatness. It arrives to ask whether you are capable of carrying it. Every extraordinary life has been examined by hardship before it was trusted with influence, because a mind that has never been tested can never truly be trusted. Imagine a blacksmith standing before a piece of cold steel. If the steel could speak, it would believe the fire was trying to destroy it. The flames burn without mercy. The hammer strikes again and again with relentless force. Every blow feels violent. Every moment inside the furnace feels unbearable. Yet the blacksmith is not destroying the steel. He is removing everything too weak to survive the life the blade was created for. The sword is not shaped despite the fire. It is shaped because of it. And perhaps the same is true of you. Perhaps the seasons you begged God to remove were the very seasons removing the weakness your future could never afford to carry. Seneca once wrote that difficulties strengthen the mind as labor strengthens the body. Read that sentence slowly, because it contains a law almost nobody lives by. The body does not become stronger while resting beneath comfort. It grows stronger only after resistance has torn its muscles apart. The mind follows exactly the same law. Every disappointment tears apart an older version of yourself. Every betrayal destroys another illusion. Every failure removes another weakness you never knew existed. Pain is not always punishment. More often, it is preparation wearing a face that frightened you before you understood its purpose. Think about the greatest people you have ever admired. Remove every obstacle from their story, and almost nothing remarkable remains. Remove prison from Nelson Mandela's life, exile from Seneca's, countless failures from Thomas Edison, bankruptcy from many of history's greatest entrepreneurs, and you erase the very moments that forged the character the world later admired. We celebrate the victory because we never had to endure the process that created it. But greatness has never accepted shortcuts. It always demands payment in advance, and that payment is almost always disguised as hardship. The ordinary mind spends its energy asking, "Why is this happening to me?" The disciplined mind asks a far more dangerous question. What is this building inside me that comfort never could? Those two questions create completely different futures. One produces bitterness. The other produces wisdom. One searches for someone to blame. The other quietly begins preparing for the opportunity hidden beneath the struggle. The obstacle itself has not changed. Only the mind standing before it has changed, and that changes everything. There is another truth hidden here that few people are willing to face. Some obstacles will not leave next week. Some wounds will remain for years. Some prayers will appear unanswered for far longer than your patience wanted to endure. Stoicism never promised that life would become easy. It promised something far more valuable. It promised that no suffering would ever be wasted unless you chose to waste it yourself. Every painful season places raw material into your hands. Whether it becomes wisdom or resentment depends entirely upon what you decide to build. So the next time life places a mountain in your path, resist the instinct to curse the climb. Mountains do something flat roads never can. They strengthen the legs that climb them, deepen the lungs that endure them, and reveal views that can never be seen from the valley below. Perhaps your obstacle was never blocking your destiny. Perhaps it was quietly becoming the only road capable of leading you there. And once that truth settles into your mind, fear begins losing its authority, because you finally understand that every hardship carries within it the blueprint of the person you are slowly becoming. Now we arrive at the fourth principle, and this is where most people quietly fail, because surviving hardship is one thing. Remaining completely unshaken while the voices around you tell you to surrender is something far more difficult. Principle 4. The silence that cannot be shaken. One afternoon, Epictetus walked into the Roman Senate, knowing something almost no man could endure. The verdict had already been decided before a single accusation was spoken. His enemies did not gather to discover the truth. They gathered to perform the appearance of justice. Every eye in the room searched his face, waiting for fear to appear. They expected him to defend himself, to beg, to argue, to surrender his dignity in exchange for another chance at life. Instead, he stood there with a calmness so unsettling that it disturbed the men who had come to destroy him. In that moment, they realized something terrifying. They could take his life, but they could not take possession of his mind. There is a reason emotionally weak people constantly provoke others. They are not searching for truth. They are searching for control. The moment they succeed in disturbing your peace, they begin believing they have authority over your inner world. Every unnecessary argument, every insult, Every attempt to pull you into drama follows the same hidden pattern. They cannot build strength within themselves, so they borrow significance by stealing your composure. The greatest victory they can imagine is not defeating your body. It is convincing your mind to abandon itself. Epictetus warned his students about this centuries ago. He taught that if another person has the power to anger you at will, then they have quietly become your master. Think about the weight of those words. Every time your peace depends upon another person's approval, another person's apology, or another person's opinion, you have unknowingly handed them the keys to your emotional freedom. The chains are invisible, but they are chains nonetheless. A free man is not someone who controls the world around him. A free man is someone whose inner state can no longer be rented by the moods of strangers. Marcus Aurelius practiced this discipline almost every day of his reign. He governed an empire filled with betrayal, corruption, criticism, and endless conflict. Yet he repeatedly reminded himself that another person's character belonged to them, while his response belonged only to him. He understood something most people never discover. Every insult reveals far more about the person speaking than the person receiving it. Hatred is often a confession disguised as an attack. Jealousy is insecurity searching for another face to blame. Anger usually exposes an inner battle that began long before you ever entered the room. Imagine standing beside a deep mountain lake before sunrise. Someone throws a stone into the water. For a few moments the surface trembles, but soon the water becomes perfectly still again because its depth is greater than the force that disturbed it. Now compare that to a shallow puddle. The smallest pebble is enough to splash mud in every direction. Human minds behave the same way. Shallow minds react to every opinion, every criticism, every disagreement. Deep minds absorb the impact, understand it, and return to stillness without losing themselves. Depth always defeats noise. This is why silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. Weak people mistake silence for fear because they cannot imagine power that does not announce itself. But the strongest individuals rarely waste energy proving themselves to those determined not to understand them. They know that endless explanations are often invitations to endless arguments. A lion does not interrupt its hunt to answer the opinions of sheep. It simply continues walking toward the direction its nature has already chosen. True confidence has no desire to win every conversation. It is too busy building a life that eventually speaks louder than words ever could. So the next time someone questions your worth, mocks your ambition, or tries to shake your confidence, remember that they are offering you a transaction. They are asking you to exchange your peace for their approval. You are never required to accept that bargain. Sometimes the most powerful sentence you will ever speak is no sentence at all. Sometimes the strongest response is a calm mind that refuses to be purchased. Because the moment your silence can no longer be disturbed, you become dangerous in a way the world rarely understands. And from that unshakable silence, the fifth principle is born, the discipline of acting long before you ever feel ready. Principle 5. Acting before you feel ready. There is a lie so deeply woven into modern thinking that most people mistake it for wisdom. They tell themselves, "I'll begin when I feel ready." They wait for confidence before taking the first step. They wait for fear to disappear before speaking. They wait for perfect timing before pursuing the life they secretly want. Years pass, opportunities fade, and the person they hoped to become slowly turns into someone they only imagine. What they never realize is that readiness was never delayed by time. It was delayed by movement. The life they were waiting for was waiting just as patiently for them. When Zeno of Citium lost everything in a shipwreck, he did not arrive in Athens carrying wealth, influence, or certainty. He arrived carrying nothing except a mind that refused to believe disaster had written the final chapter of his life. Instead of mourning what the sea had taken from him, he walked into a small bookshop where he encountered philosophy for the first time. That single decision, made while his future looked completely uncertain, became the beginning of Stoicism itself. Had Zeno waited until life felt comfortable again, history would never have remembered his name. His greatest beginning arrived disguised as his greatest ending. Fear has a remarkable talent for sounding intelligent. It rarely says, "Never begin." Instead, it whispers something far more convincing. Prepare a little longer. Wait for a better moment. Learn one more skill. Save a little more money. Think about it one more time. None of those thoughts sound dangerous on their own, yet when repeated often enough, they quietly become the architecture of an entire life built on hesitation. Fear understands something most people do not. It does not need to stop you forever. It only needs to convince you to postpone today. Tomorrow will take care of the rest. The Stoics believed courage was never the absence of fear. Courage was the refusal to let fear become the author of your decisions. Imagine a Roman soldier standing before a battlefield. His heart races, his hands tremble. Every instinct inside him screams to run. Yet he steps forward anyway because discipline has become stronger than emotion. That is the secret almost nobody teaches. Extraordinary people are not fearless. They are simply no longer obedient to their fear. They allow fear to travel beside them, but they never allow it to hold the map. Look back at every chapter of your life that truly changed you. Chances are you were not ready when it began. You were not ready for the responsibility. You were not ready for the uncertainty. You were not ready for the sacrifice. Yet somehow, by continuing to move, you became the person capable of carrying all three. Readiness did not appear before the journey. It was forged by the journey itself. Every step taught you something the starting line never could. Motion became the teacher that comfort had failed to provide. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. Most of the battles people lose never actually happen. They exist only inside rehearsals of disaster that play endlessly in the mind. We imagine rejection before anyone has rejected us. We imagine failure before we have even tried. We imagine humiliation before a single word has been spoken. By the time reality finally arrives, we have already exhausted ourselves fighting ghosts that never intended to exist. The disciplined mind breaks that cycle. It replaces endless imagination with immediate action, knowing that reality is almost always kinder than the fears created by an undisciplined mind. So if there is a conversation you have been avoiding, have it. If there is a dream you have been postponing, begin it. If there is a version of yourself you have been waiting to become, stop waiting for permission from a future that has remained silent for years. Action has always been the language through which destiny answers. The first imperfect step will teach you more than 1,000 perfect plans ever could. Because the man who keeps walking eventually reaches places, the man who keeps preparing will only continue imagining. But even after you begin, another challenge quietly appears. Starting once is never enough. The mind must be trained every single day, or it slowly drifts back toward comfort, distraction, and fear. That daily discipline is the foundation of the sixth principle, and without it, every lesson you have learned so far begins to fade. Principle 6. Training the mind before the world. Tests it. Musonius Rufus, the teacher who shaped the mind of Epictetus, believed there was one mistake that separated those who admired philosophy from those who were transformed by it. He warned that knowledge without practice is nothing more than entertainment. A man may memorize every Stoic principle ever written, quote Marcus Aurelius with perfect accuracy, and speak beautifully about discipline, yet the first unexpected hardship will expose the truth. In that single moment, life reveals whether his philosophy lives only in his memory or has been carved into his character. The world does not examine what you know. It examines what you have practiced when nobody was watching. Think about an archer preparing for battle. He does not wait until arrows are flying toward him before learning how to aim. He repeats the same movement thousands of times in complete silence until his hands no longer need permission from his mind. When the battle finally begins, his body simply remembers what discipline taught it months before. Life operates by the same law. Most people attempt to become patient only after chaos arrives. They attempt courage only after fear appears. They attempt self-control only after anger has already taken control. They are trying to build a shield while standing in the middle of the battlefield, never realizing that shields are forged long before the first sword is drawn. This is why your private habits are quietly deciding your public future. Every morning you choose discipline over comfort. You strengthen a part of yourself the world cannot yet see. Every promise you keep to yourself becomes evidence that your own word can be trusted. Every unnecessary excuse you refuse to make weakens the voice inside your mind that has spent years negotiating with mediocrity. Character is never created during moments of pressure. Pressure simply reveals the character that daily habits have already built in complete secrecy. Modern psychology calls this repetition. The Stoics simply called it training. They understood that every thought repeated often enough becomes easier to think again. Every action repeated often enough becomes easier to repeat again. Whether you realize it or not, your mind is always rehearsing something. Some people rehearse fear every morning by imagining everything that could go wrong. Others rehearse confidence by preparing themselves to meet difficulty with calm. Both are training their minds. The only difference is the future each form of training eventually creates. Imagine two gardens standing side by side through an entire season. The first is carefully tended every single day. Weeds are removed while they are still small. Healthy plants are watered before they begin dying. The second garden is ignored until the weeds have completely taken over. By the time the owner decides to care, the work has become 10 times harder than it ever needed to be. Your mind follows the same pattern. Every negative thought ignored becomes another root. Every destructive habit tolerated becomes another branch. Discipline is not difficult because it demands too much effort. It is difficult because it demands attention before the damage becomes obvious. Marcus Aurelius never assumed that one good day meant he had mastered himself forever. Every evening he returned to his journal, examining not the mistakes of other people, but the condition of his own mind. He understood that self-reflection is the highest form of responsibility. The strongest individuals are not those who spend their lives correcting everyone else. They are those who possess the humility to keep correcting themselves. Every honest review removes another illusion. Every lesson applied makes tomorrow's battle slightly easier than today's. So, before you ask whether the world is preparing opportunities for you, ask a more uncomfortable question. Have you been preparing yourself for the opportunities the world may already be sending? Because success often arrives quietly, without warning, and it never pauses to wait for someone who chose comfort over preparation. Fortune has always favored the disciplined mind, not because fate is unfair, but because discipline recognizes opportunities that an untrained mind is too distracted to see. And once the mind has been trained day after day, something extraordinary begins to happen. Temporary failures lose their ability to define you. Delays stop feeling permanent. Fear no longer speaks with absolute authority. You begin seeing your entire life from a higher place, where one bad day is no longer mistaken for a bad life. That higher perspective is the final discipline Marcus Aurelius returned to again and again, and it is the seventh principle that brings every lesson together. Principle 7. The view from above. In the middle of war, while disease spread through the empire and death visited Rome almost every day, Marcus Aurelius practiced a habit that sounded strange to everyone except the Stoics. Whenever grief, fear, or disappointment threatened to consume him, he would force his mind to rise above the moment. He imagined looking down upon the empire from the highest mountain, then higher still, until Rome itself became only a small point upon the earth. The armies, the arguments, the victories, the failures, and even his own suffering gradually became smaller with every step his mind climbed upward. Nothing about reality had changed, only his perspective had. And sometimes perspective is the difference between a burden that crushes a man and a burden he discovers he was always strong enough to carry. This is the final discipline because it protects every discipline that came before it. Most people never lose because of one great failure. They lose because they mistake one painful chapter for the entire story. One rejection convinces them nobody will ever choose them. One financial loss convinces them prosperity was never meant for them. One betrayal convinces them trust is impossible. One difficult season convinces them life itself has turned against them. They reduce an entire lifetime to a single moment, forgetting that no author has ever judged a book by reading only one page. Yet millions quietly judge their own lives exactly that way. Imagine standing 2 inches away from a massive painting. All you can see is one dark brushstroke crossing the canvas. From that distance it appears ugly, meaningless, even accidental. But with every step backward, another part of the picture reveals itself. What looked like chaos slowly becomes order. What appeared to be destruction becomes contrast. What seemed like the darkest part of the painting becomes the very detail that gives the masterpiece its depth. Life follows the same pattern. Some experiences only make sense after enough time has passed for you to see the picture they were helping create. Distance does not erase pain, but it often reveals purpose that pain itself refused to show. Seneca understood this truth while living in exile, separated from the power and influence he once possessed. To an ordinary man, exile looked like the end of everything worth building. Yet it was during those years of isolation that he wrote many of the ideas that would survive long after emperors, kingdoms, and armies had disappeared into history. The world believed his life had been reduced. In reality, it had been refined. Sometimes destiny removes you from the noise of your old life because the next version of you cannot be built where the previous version was comfortable. What feels like abandonment is often preparation carried out in silence. Ask yourself one question that very few people have the courage to face honestly. Will the problem keeping you awake tonight still matter 5 years from now? Most of the time the answer is no. The argument will be forgotten. The embarrassment will disappear. The opinion that wounded your pride will belong to people whose names you may not even remember. Yet countless lives are permanently shaped by temporary emotions. We surrender years of peace to moments that time was already preparing to erase. The Stoics refused to live that way. They trained themselves to measure life by decades instead of days, by character instead of comfort, and by purpose instead of passing emotion. Picture an old sailor crossing a violent sea before the age of modern navigation. The waves beneath his ship rise and fall without mercy. Storms hide the coastline. Winds constantly push him away from his destination. But the sailor does not steer by watching the waves. He lifts his eyes toward the stars because the stars remain steady while everything beneath them moves. If he focused only on the water, he would believe he was lost every few minutes. By fixing his attention on something higher, he always found his way home. Your principles must become those stars. Circumstances will change, emotions will change, success and failure will change, but the mind anchored to timeless principles never loses its direction simply because the weather becomes difficult. Now look back at the 7 principles you have traveled through. You learned to master perception before circumstances mastered you. You learned to choose certainty before evidence appeared. You discovered that obstacles are often the hidden road forward. You understood the strength of a silence that cannot be shaken. You accepted that action must come before confidence. You trained your mind every day instead of waiting for life to train it through suffering. And finally, you learned to rise above temporary storms so that no single moment could ever convince you your story was over. These are not 7 motivational ideas. They are 7 disciplines that, practiced consistently, reshape the architecture of a human mind. Remember this above everything else. The greatest victory of Marcus Aurelius was never that he ruled Rome. The greatest victory was that Rome never ruled his mind. Wealth disappears. Status fades. Beauty changes. Empires rise and collapse beneath the weight of time. But a disciplined mind becomes one possession that no misfortune, no enemy, and no passing season can ever steal. Build that mind patiently, one decision at a time. And there will come a day when you realize the victory you spent years searching for in the outside world had been quietly growing within you all along. History remembers Marcus Aurelius as an emperor, Seneca as a philosopher, and Epictetus as a former slave who became one of the greatest teachers the world has ever known. Yet if you strip away their titles, their wealth, and the centuries separating them, you find that they all possessed the same advantage. It was not power, it was not intelligence, it was not luck. It was a mind so disciplined that circumstances could no longer decide who they would become. That is the greatest gift Stoicism offers. Not inspiration for a single day, but a way of thinking that remains unshaken for a lifetime. Perhaps when this lesson began, you believed your greatest enemy was failure, rejection, uncertainty, or bad luck. But now you have seen something deeper. None of those things truly control your future until your own mind surrenders to them. Every external battle begins as an internal one, and the moment you reclaim your mind, you begin reclaiming your life. The world may not change overnight, but the person walking through it certainly can. Do not misunderstand Stoicism. It never promised a life without suffering. There will still be days when doubt returns, plans collapse, and progress feels invisible. The difference is that hardship will no longer decide your identity. Every challenge will ask the same question. Will you let this moment define you? And every day, your answer will shape your future far more than the challenge itself. Remember the 7 disciplines you have learned. Master your perception. Choose certainty before proof. Turn obstacles into teachers. Protect your inner peace. Act before you feel ready. Train your mind daily. Rise above temporary storms. These are not motivational ideas. They are habits that quietly reshape a human life, one decision at a time. Years from now, people may admire your confidence, your calmness, and your resilience. They will think you were simply born that way. They will never see the thousands of silent battles you fought when nobody was watching, because that is where real strength has always been created. Character is never built in the spotlight. It is built in the ordinary moments when no one is there to applaud you. So when this video ends, don't simply admire these principles. Live them. Practice them tomorrow, then the day after, until they stop feeling like lessons and become your nature. One day you will face a challenge that would have broken the person you used to be, yet you will remain calm. In that quiet moment, you will finally understand the lesson Marcus Aurelius spent his life teaching himself. The greatest victory was never over the world. The greatest victory was always over the mind that believed the world could defeat you.